I used to think being reasonable was a kind of quiet superpower. You absorb things: disappointment, inconvenience, other people's emergencies. And in exchange, you get to believe you're the stable one. Nobody tells you that stability is just another word for the person everyone assumes will bend. I want to be clear about the house first, because the house is where all of this actually starts. My grandmother didn't have much. What she had, she left to me. Not because she loved me more than my sister Emma, but because she'd watched me spend a decade renting apartments with landlords who didn't fix the heat, and she wanted, in her words, one thing that's just yours that nobody can take back. I used the inheritance to buy a small house outside Portland with a crooked porch and a maple tree older than the street. It wasn't a mansion. It was mine in a way nothing had ever been mine before. I moved in during March. By June, Emma called to say she had ovarian cancer, stage 2, and needed somewhere to recover after surgery. She couldn't afford her apartment and chemo at the same time. She wanted to move into my guest room for a few months, maybe less. I want to be honest about my first feeling, because it still embarrasses me. It wasn't suspicion. It was shame. Shame that some part of me had gone quiet and calculating before I'd even said yes. Already rearranging furniture in my head. Already grieving the version of the house that existed before this phone call. I hated that reflex in myself. I told her yes before I'd told my husband, Daniel, because saying yes fast felt like proof I wasn't the kind of person who hesitates over a sister's cancer. Daniel and I talked about logistics that night. He wasn't cruel about it. He just had this tone, the one he used whenever Emma's name came up, a tone built over 15 years of her crises arriving like weather, and him always being the one to say, of course, obviously, how could you even ask? When I mentioned carefully that I wanted to keep an office for myself, just one room, he said, "You're being selfish for even hesitating." He didn't say it to wound me. He said it like a fact he'd said 100 times before, about other things, other years. I only noticed it that night because it was finally about my house. The next 6 weeks were administrative more than emotional. I'm an insurance coordinator by trade. It's a boring job that turned out to matter. I started calling Emma's oncology office to help sync her treatment schedule with our household calendar. Nothing more sinister than that. But the dates didn't match what she'd told us. An appointment, she said, was a chemo infusion turned out, according to the scheduling system, to be a follow-up consult with no infusion booked. A prescription she mentioned wasn't in the pharmacy's records under her insurance. I told myself these were clerical errors. I have learned since that people build entire lives out of the sentence, "These are clerical errors." I called her oncologist's office directly, not as an accusation, just as someone trying to arrange her father's old recliner into a room before a surgery date. The nurse on the phone paused in a way that told me everything before she said anything. Then she told me she couldn't discuss a patient's records without authorization, but she could confirm gently that there was no scheduled surgery on file for Emma at all. I didn't yell. I didn't confront anyone that day. I just sat in my car in a pharmacy parking lot for 40 minutes, watching people go in and out with paper bags, feeling something in my chest rearrange itself permanently. At dinner 2 weeks later, the kind of dinner where my mother makes too much food because food is how she manages fear, Emma was describing a chemo session in specific, vivid detail, the metallic taste. The nurse who reminded her of a teacher she'd had in high school. I let her finish. Then I stood up, not dramatically, just to clear a plate, and said, "I spoke to your doctor's office this morning. There's no surgery on file. No chemo scheduled. Nothing since the initial consult in April. I didn't say liar, I didn't need to." Emma's face went the color of the tablecloth. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize, which, fairly, he was. What came after wasn't a confession so much as an unraveling. Emma crying, then angry, then crying again. Saying something about how she'd needed a reason people would take seriously. How nobody moved fast enough for her otherwise. How she'd meant to actually go to the appointments eventually. I believed that she believed it. That's the part that still sits heavy with me. She wasn't a monster. She was someone who'd learned, the same as I had, that some kinds of need get honored and others don't, and she'd chosen the kind that worked. She didn't move in. My mother didn't speak to me for a month, then did, carefully, like the subject was a fracture that hadn't set right. Daniel and I are still married, but something between us shifted that night at the table and never fully shifted back. He'd asked me to bend for a lie he hadn't checked, and some trust doesn't rebuild on apology alone. I kept the house. I kept the maple tree, the crooked porch, the office with the door that closes. I didn't win anything, exactly. I just stopped being the person who absorbs first and asks questions later. I don't know if Emma is actually sick now. In some smaller, true way, nobody's diagnosed. I think about that more than I'd like to admit. Some doors, once you've had to close them, don't reopen just because you miss the room.